Personal finance, looking after our money. It's something we all have to do, and it's always a very personal thing in terms of the decisions we make, what we do. But how does it work for someone who is a loner, who lives alone, who doesn't have any responsibilities? What's it like managing money? Hey, and welcome to this video. This is episode 12, I think, now, of my series where I talk every day for about 10 minutes or so, unscripted and unedited, on a topic, just to try and improve my speaking, and perhaps I can even offer some entertainment and advice to you. I've linked the video in the description that I've been inspired by, but once again I'm going a bit off topic with this one. It's something that I'm quite interested and passionate about, and that's money management, personal finance, and my history with it. So I've got a lot of stories about how I was terrible with money, but now I feel somewhat financially secure. I'll also like to talk about, if I have the time, people I know and how they differ from me, and perhaps even offer some advice, some suggestions. Now, I can't offer personal finance advice, of course, but just some advice of things to think about. So, this is something I was thinking about recently while I was at work. I do overhear my colleagues and what they're talking about in the office and in the labs and such, so we're all scientists, so you'd think we're all very educated people, but as, let's say, if you've read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the whole point of that book, if I recall, is the main character has got two dads. Well, he's got one dad, his biological father, who is a scientist, or something like that. It might be a psychologist, and his friend's dad, who is like a savvy businessman. And this savvy businessman with no sort of real academic experience is financially well off, but his own father, who is a esteemed doctor or professor or something along those lines in his field, is not doing so well financially. But I can't quite remember the entire plot of the book, but something along those lines, that's how it worked. And it's actually very similar in my place of work. So my colleagues, the way they talk about money, it does, I feel like if I was in their position, I'd be very uncomfortable. The majority of them are in huge amounts of debt. They're using these payday loans, or whatever they're called, Klarna equivalents, to buy takeaways and groceries and such, and they're constantly spending money on experiences and discovering themselves and such, little trinkets and gifts. And I mean, we're all like late stage millennials, so it's getting a bit late to do this in my biased opinion. But I suppose, yeah, like I said, it's personal finance, so all the decisions are personal decisions as to what is best, what you think is best for you. But what's best for me, I think, at this stage is not to be in crippling debt at this stage in life. I mean, they even talk about like manifesting money now, so that's the new buzzword, whereby they will manifest a lifestyle in their minds, and then it'll somehow eventually happen because of this. I think that's how it works. I don't quite understand, and I don't follow this philosophy at all. I have no idea what they're talking about. But back to me then. So I was never very good with money when I was young. I did have jobs like paper rounds and jobs in convenience stores, but I never was in a situation where I was really low on money, or my family was, or at least I wasn't aware of this. My parents never really gave me any education or talks about money, other than this one story I vaguely remember when I was given a crisp £5 note by somebody, like I think it was a relative or so, and I was so happy. My dad took me and my £5 note to the bank. He took my £5 note off of me and he just gave it to the cashier and opened a bank account for me. And I was devastated. I was like, what? But that was my £5. I wanted to spend that. And then he tried to explain the concept of interest to me, but I didn't want to wait for a year or 2 years or 10 years for my money to grow very slightly, at a 5% interest rate or whatever it was. Little young me didn't understand this, and I almost resented it, I suppose, at the time. I wanted my money back. But yeah, continuing on through my life, I eventually ended up at university, and the only reason, to be honest, and this is a bit sad, I suppose, I was able to afford to go to university and pay the accommodation fees and such was because I had a family member pass away. And I got quite a big inheritance from that. Well, quite a big. At the time, it was quite big. If I were to get it now, it wouldn't really be life-changing money. It was just like a share in a house, I suppose, and something like £10,000 or £20,000, something along those lines. And I used this money to have a lot of fun at university, in the sense that I just squandered it on things. I bought electronic devices, computers, alcohol, all those things, and it wasn't great, I suppose. I didn't have a single thought about the future at the time. I was like, well, university is my life, I suppose. I better spend the money I have and enjoy it. Worrying about money is something to do in the future when I'm, have a job. It'll all work itself out then, and that is not a great attitude to have. I guess I was lucky to have the money, because if I didn't have that, then I'd be taking out massive loans and such. So I see that I was in somewhat of a privileged position, but by the time I'd completely finished university, so this was my master's degree, I was down to my last few £100, and this was a bit bad because all of my family had left the country. I couldn't just move back home, because then I'd have to move abroad, I suppose, and I didn't have any kind of status to... Oh, actually, no, we were still in the European Union then, so I guess I could have moved abroad. But no, I had to get a job as soon as possible, and I moved to a city, and I lived in the worst accommodation, but the cheapest that I could find. It was a couple of £100 a month, and it covered everything. It was in a rough area. The people I had to live with, because it was like a shared house, they were tough to live with. I kept myself to myself, and at that point, the one thing on my mind was going back to university, trying to save up to go back to university, and I couldn't really see anything else in my life, to be honest. Going back to university and perhaps then doing another master's degree, then doing a PhD, something along those lines. That was my goal, my plan. So, well, I started saving, and that's where my personal finance journey began, I suppose. So, for me, it was a case of trying to spend as little money as possible, while putting as much into my savings account as I could. I didn't know anything about, the theory of saving money, living below your means, that sort of thing. I kind of just worked it all out by myself at the time. I wouldn't watch these things on YouTube. I wouldn't read any books. Who reads a book? That was my attitude at the time. What am I going to get from that? And so I lived a very, very cheap life, and actually I'm quite proud of it at the time. I was living on just lentils and rice in terms of food. I got rid of my car. I just cycled to work I had a cycle to work scheme bicycle, and I didn't spend much at all. Following this, I then somehow managed to get involved in living in an accommodation, and I was living there for free somehow. But I took on an extra job there as a fire warden, so I had free accommodation, free bills. Following on from this, I ended up picking up a food delivery gig on the side, so one of those gig economy jobs, and I was making an absolute killing. The problem was, at the time, I was just putting all my money in a 1% savings account, and that was some wasted potential there. But I think, just as luck would have it, I stumbled across a few YouTube channels. I think the one I watched originally was called Pensioncraft, and it was a very small channel with an old guy with grey hair, and he would talk about investing and such. Now, because I had no background in investing or stocks or anything along those lines, anything other than putting my money in a savings account, the attitude is, well, that's scary. I watched The Wolf of Wall Street. I could lose all my money and end up in prison or something along those lines. How do I pick stocks? How do I invest? That sort of thing. And I don't think that this channel really explained it very well at the time, but then there wasn't very much information at the time. His videos were very long, and I still was quite concerned about it at the time. So it actually took me a few years to begin investing, and that's something I started doing in 2019, I think, as there was some... Oh no, sorry, it must have been 2018, December, because I remember there being some kind of temporary crash the second I started investing, and I was like, oh god, it's happened, I've lost all my money. And I only had £100 in the stock market at the time, in the markets. I'm not really going to explain how I'm investing and such, because that's sort of beyond the scope of this video. It's just little stories about my personal finance and such. I would like to talk about it more in the future, once I can articulate my story. But this is just me rambling about personal finance, my own personal finance. But anyway, yeah. After this, I just started regularly investing. So every month, and ever since then, I think £500 has come out of my wages. And because I live the loner lifestyle, it's something I can very easily do. I don't really spend much money. I think, as I've talked about before, I don't go on holiday. I don't spend any money on myself. I don't really have a very expensive life. The things that I like are cheap. I think for me, a treat is like a Pizza Hut, and that's like £4. The one I tend to buy. It's a good carry out offer. And yeah, it's just been like that since then. And the markets have been doing okay, I suppose, over the last however long it's been since 2018, like 80 years almost. Oh God, that's actually been a while. I've always had some sort of emergency fund, and that's again something I've learned from watching YouTube videos and such. And I'm sort of financially okay at the moment. My colleagues have made no change whatsoever, and they're all still financially in precarious positions, but they seem happy, I suppose, that the government will look after them in the future. My workplace has an amazing pension that I'm on. Most of my colleagues are not on, which, like, it's always best not to really talk to people about these things because people are very defensive, I find, about their personal finance. They don't want to hear your opinion or that they may have done something wrong. And I mean, fair enough, like maybe I've done something wrong. I'm almost certain that there are better things I can do. I can surely spend less money in certain areas, invest and save more, manage and track the money a bit better. But what about my advice? Well, it's not financial advice, unfortunately. My advice is to, I suppose it sounds a bit demeaning, but to just educate yourself. Don't listen to YouTubers. Don't listen to just one person or one group of people. Listen to a broad range of opinions on these things and ideas. I've never read any books on this apart from that one book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, but some people seem to swear by these books. I would say that, in general, personal finance is quite a simple thing in the sense that you just don't spend too much money, but you have to stretch that out quite a lot, I suppose, when your whole career is based upon talking about this sort of thing. So yeah, I can't recommend any videos for anyone because I don't know anyone's individual situation, what would be best for them. But just look around, kind of describe your situation and where you want to be, I suppose, and listen to a broad range of opinions about things and teach yourself that way. It is a very personal thing. That's why it's called personal finance, I suppose. So don't try and just copy other people. And yeah, the fact that you actually are thinking about it at all already puts you way ahead of the average person I've seen, because I'm the only person that I know. I don't know many people, but I know more than none, and I know a range of people in different stages of their lives, but I'm the only person I know who's actually taking this seriously at all. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting, and thank you for listening. It's a Friday for me at the moment, so I'm back in my house recording tomorrow. But yeah, I'll see you tomorrow then.